Coming up tonight, the Empress of Seas has smooth sailing as she spends her first full day at sea of this voyage. The captain welcomes everybody aboard not just once, but twice this evening. And we get to sit down with him to learn more about how he not only started with the Empress, but returned to her. It's all coming up, so let's set sail. Welcome to day number 3 of the cruise view from on board the Empress of the Seas. Today was Saturday, October 12th, 2019, and first full day at sea for the Empress of the Seas. Our location today was sailing between Key West down to Costa Maya with a full day at sea. Our noontime location was 21 degrees and 58 minutes north by 85 degrees and 17 minutes west. We're traveling at about 15 knots to make it to Costa Maya on time tomorrow, and at noon we're just off the western tip of Cuba. We didn't have too much ship spotting today. We did see several birds flying around the ship this afternoon as we were near Cuba, and we saw a couple cargo ships. It wasn't until tonight at about 10:45 p.m. that we saw our first cruise ship pass, the very first cruise ship of this entire sailing since we saw the Vision of the Seas. And that was another Royal Caribbean ship. We passed the Majesty of the Seas. She was headed in the opposite direction of us tonight. As for the weather today, we had a sunrise this morning at about 7:42 a.m. ship time, and sunset tonight about 7:26 p.m. We had, according to the compass, cloudy conditions. From what I saw out there, it was mainly sunny today. Pretty much stayed consistently sunny on board the entire day. We had a little bit of cloud cover from time to time, but for the most part, we did not sail through those clouds. We stayed in the sunny weather, and at several times throughout the day, you could look off the side of the ship and spot a rain cloud dropping some rain out over the ocean. We avoided all of it, though, and stayed dry the entire day long, and just had absolutely beautiful conditions today. We had a listed high of 86 degrees, and the seas were incredibly calm. Really no movement in this ship. We had a full day at sea and never really felt the ship actually sailing smoother than probably any of the Quantum Class sea days that I've experienced. You usually feel some level of movement on those ships, and this one, pretty much nothing. It has been completely calm the entire day, and the winds were 9 miles an hour, but once again, it seemed like they were going pretty well with the ship, so it wasn't too big of a problem. It wasn't overly windy out there. Just an absolutely incredible weather day for us on this first sea day of the voyage. Tonight, it is a little bit humid though. When you go outside, you can just feel that wet stickiness. So it's not the nicest conditions to be outside tonight, but for the entire day, while everyone wanted to be outside, it was absolutely beautiful. And looking at our compass then for what went on today, this morning I got up at 9 a.m., had breakfast in the Windjammer again, just like yesterday, and once again, it was empty, and that's the theme that I've noticed throughout the ship. It is an empty ship. She is sold out. She's completely filled, but the crowds are not there. When you are on this ship, there are so many large venues on board compared to the number of passengers that it just feels very empty, very spacious. You can walk around the ship at times like this and not see anybody for a while. So it is an absolutely incredible ship, and amazing how well the flow of passengers just dissipates throughout the ship, even with such a small size to her. The first main event, though, of the day really didn't come until 1 p.m. I spent the morning doing a couple interviews, walking around the ship a bit, checking out the sights out in the ocean, and when I looked at that pool deck, it was beautiful out there. There were a ton of people out at that pool deck, but there were still chairs available the entire day. Up on deck number 11, there were tons of chairs available. The hammocks were even empty most of the time, so there really are not even crowd issues with the pool, even though it is such a small deck. I heard that the actual pool itself was at capacity, so they had to do some rationing to get people in and out to keep from going over capacity there, but at least the pool deck itself wasn't overly crowded. And 1 o'clock then was the first event, as I mentioned, and that was the men's international belly flop competition. That was hosted by Andy, just like we've seen some of the other events hosted by him. He took on the belly flop competition, and it was a pretty traditional one. 2 rounds. First round, everybody jumped right off of the pool side into the pool, did their best belly flop, let everybody in the audience judge them, and counted those scores up. For round 2, they then used the box. Got a little more air, bigger splash, and of course a bigger flop on those. And then at the end, something a little bit different. Instead of having them all jump in the pool at once and do a giant belly flop, they each jumped in as their position was called in the rankings. And when it was all said and done and the entire competition was over, Andy then took off his mic, took off all of his name tags and other gear, and jumped in the pool himself, something that we haven't really seen from the other cruise director staff getting right in there, but from what we've seen of him so far, it's not too unexpected to expect things like that out of him. So that was 1 p.m., lasted about half an hour. 1:30, went to lunch in the Windjammer, and even with that belly flop competition coming to an end right next door to the Windjammer, even lunch was empty today. So it really has not had a moment of crowdedness anywhere, and that's something that'll continue throughout this compass today, because tonight we had a series of large-scale events. Starting at 5 p.m., we had the Crown and Anchor Welcome Back event. This event was held in Bolero's lounge at the back of the ship. Most sailings, they've kind of separated this from the captain's night, but for this sailing, at least, it was the exact same night and really kind of introed the whole flow of the event. So that was 5 o'clock, and it featured, of course, Elvis introducing the captain giving a bit of a speech, and introducing several of his officers as well, and letting them each make a comment or two before letting everybody adjourn. It was only about a half-hour event because that was scheduled at 5 o'clock, and the first dinner is normally 5:30. But before we get into that, we got a few bits of information. There are a total of 743 Crown and Anchor members on board, which is about 40% of the total guest capacity of the ship. And of those, 123 were Platinum, 43 Emerald, 103 Diamonds, 72 Diamond Plus, and 6 Pinnacle members. So a lot more Crown and Anchor members than I would have expected for the Empress of the Seas. Walking around the ship at night, they do not have a Diamond Lounge on here, but you get your 3 free drinks that you can use at any bar. And for the most part, unlike the past several sailings, when you went to those bars, you don't see many people asking for their diamond drinks. You don't see people hanging out at the bars to collect those drinks. So you really don't feel like there's actually 200 members on board that are in that category of able to get those drinks, because there's just no sign of it. Everybody is pretty well laid back, and it's overall a very casual sailing compared to some of the other ones we've done lately. So as mentioned, that was 5 o'clock, ended 5:30. That would normally be time for dinner, but tonight we had a special dinner, so instead of the 5:30 dinner, had to switch things up. And at 7 o'clock, went to the production showtime at Balamos. And that is the first of 2 productions by the Royal Caribbean singers and dancers on board the Empress of the Seas. This, of course, as the name sounds, is a bit more of a Latin-style show. Advertised as Latin style, it was designed specifically for the fact that she was headed to Cuba, bringing that Latin vibe to the shows, the entertainment, all elements of this ship to really go along with that special itinerary. And that was kind of what I was expecting from it. Got a good seat right up front to watch that show. And that show, despite the name and what some of the advertising on land said, it was much more in line with what the billboards on the ship said. The billboards described it as feel the rhythm and celebrate all things dancing, and that is exactly what it was. It was moments of very deep Latin. Probably about half the show is Latin, but the other half was pretty good mix of different things, from some flapper girl style outfits and all different kinds of dance styles to that very deep Latin performance that covered the half of the show. And that was the very first Royal Caribbean production show we've seen on board the Empress of the Seas. This is a very different style ship than what we've seen on the other ones. This is not a new ship. That theater is not a brand new theater. It's not on the same level as what the other Royal Caribbean ships are. But all the entertainment on board the ship was designed for her return to the fleet. So everything here was designed within the past 2.5, 3 years, and that means that it was all designed after the Quantum of the Seas set sail, which gives you an idea of just where Royal Caribbean's entertainment standards were when she was getting all these brand new shows. And this show, despite how small that stage was and how much smaller the cast seems than the ones that we've seen on some of the larger ships, did an incredible job of really filling that venue and making the show feel complete. It did not feel lacking in any way, as I was kind of expecting with the smaller venue and content available to them. They had giant digital screen in the back, they had a couple different set changes, and it really did feel like some of the shows we saw on board the Ovation of the Seas. But the one thing that was done a little bit different was normally the singers are kind of off to the side and they sing, they have a little bit of involvement. In this show, the singers were one of the dancers. They were involved in the scenes, they had movement, they had a whole lot of interaction, and in several of the scenes there were full-blown dancers involved in them. So the cast may be slightly smaller, but the members they do have are utilized far more extensively. It also seemed like the cast was on stage a lot more than we've seen in other shows. The changes of outfits went very quickly. Cast members were off the stage and back on in a matter of half a song at most. It seemed like they never went more than a moment without being pulled back out, and cast members went on and off continuously. The other thing that was interesting that I picked up on pretty quickly that seemed to be used throughout the show was the element of different things happening in different spaces. So we've seen singers off in one corner of the stage and dancers in another, but in this show the stage is kind of small, and if you had all the dancers in one spot it becomes very noticeable. When you have the big stage, you're focusing on one area. It doesn't make it feel empty, you're just watching one thing, but here you really were watching those dancers, and as they were moving around, you had the singers in another area doing more than just standing there singing, but putting on a secondary little show at the same time. So you kind of had two elements to focus on, two elements to catch your attention, and it certainly made the stage feel much larger. It made the production and the show itself feel much larger, and they used more than the stage. They used the stairs on either side of the stage that lead up to the balcony. They used both the platform next to the stage as well as the entire stairs and even the area in front of the stage to really expand upon the actual area and space they have to use to perform. So that certainly helps make it feel bigger. And the other thing is, while the stage is smaller, there was nothing extra on the stage to kind of waste space. On the other ships we see the band stage up there and the bands in the back performing throughout the show. In the case of this show, they actually moved the band to the side of the stage in an area right by the stairs that lead to the balcony that is otherwise left empty. So it's an unused space, and this performance was used for the band. So there was still a live band. Everything was live throughout the entire show. Performers, singers, music. And you had that entire stage dedicated to nothing but the performers. And as I mentioned, that stage is not a new one. It's not up to those modern standards. It does not seem to have lifts or risers in it. It did have one moment where it had a turntable that they utilized for the dancers. That added a cool little effect to it. So without all those elements of movement in the stage to really help out, what they do have, they take full advantage of, and that is the lighting. They used the lighting extensively. There was a lot of focus, it felt like, on shadows, because we see lighting where it adds impact. It jumps colors, adds different effects to it, but in this performance, the absence of lighting was as powerful as the lighting itself, because it seemed like there was a constant use of subtle lighting and partial lighting to really add to the environment and enhance the experience and power of what was on the stage rather than just shining lights onto it. And that really took that show to another level from what we've seen some of the other shows where the lighting might wow you more. In this case, it was certainly just beautifully done to watch throughout the performance. So that was 7 o'clock. They had a second show later in the night, but immediately after that 7 o'clock production show at 7:45, right here in the Centrum, everything flows back and forth on the ship beautifully every night. So right after we exited the Royal Theater, we went straight to the Centrum to watch the captain's welcome reception. And this was the most efficiently done reception I've seen. we've seen receptions in the past, and it says a start time. You get there, you're waiting a half hour, the crowds are hanging around, and then eventually the captain may come out and give a speech. This one started at 7:45, and probably by 7:50, cruise director was out there giving his speech and bringing the captain out to give his speech and bringing all the crew out. So it really went fast and efficient. There was no waiting around, no wondering when things were actually going to be. We went straight from that production show ending at 7:45. Within 5 minutes, the reception was officially starting, and the captain, of course, gave his long speech tonight, along with several members of the officers team, right down on deck 5.5, right between deck 5 and 6, in the middle of the Centrum. And that lasted about 10-15 minutes before things broke up and the captain went to take his pictures with the guests. And just like I've mentioned all day, I said it would continue throughout this compass. The Centrum, the welcome reception, typically it gets crowded. Hard to find areas to go to watch. We saw it on the Grandeur. It was like 2-3 deep all the way around on several floors. Tonight, I was on deck number 6, the second floor, and there was gaps. There was plenty of room all the way around to go watch it. You didn't have to get here super early. We got there 2 minutes before the speech pretty much because we waited till the end of the production show. And when it was going on, it was 1 deep. There weren't 2-3 deep. You didn't have to struggle to see over a person. And even down on deck 5, there was plenty of room to come out and watch. So even the welcome reception showed just how much space is available on the ship for every guest. It really seems like, I don't know what the numbers are officially, but I'm sure they don't do justice to it. Probably because the smaller cabins really help to account for this. But there is certainly, from the feel of it, far more space per guest on this ship than any other ship that I've been on. So as soon as that was over, right when that speech ended, went from deck 6 down to deck 5 in the schooner bar. Because I mentioned we had a special dinner tonight, we got invited to the captain's table for the evening. So that was at 8 o'clock. We had to meet in the schooner bar. It was a group of 9 guests, along with, tonight the captain's table was hosted by the hotel director, John Denton, as well as the guest services manager, Anna, who joined us for that meal. It started off in the schooner bar with everybody meeting and introducing ourselves, along with having a quick toast and greeting with John Denton, and the captain himself, Captain Shawn, also came over to greet us and have a little chat before heading off for those photos. So that lasted until 8:30. We then headed over to the main dining room for the official dinner itself. And of course, for that, if you've been on a Royal Caribbean ship, you've probably seen the main dining room. That special table right in the middle of the dining room on each ship on the main floor. Usually it's a slightly larger table with a different tablecloth, different kinds of tables and setup on it. And that was how it was tonight. It was a table right in the middle of the main dining room. We headed from deck 5 right across into the dining room and then down the stairs to that table on deck 4. Everybody got together behind the table and took a group photo before going to our assigned seats and having a long conversation throughout the evening. We started that meal at 8:30. It did not end until about 10:45 tonight. So it was an incredibly long meal. But we had a special menu. It was a mix of what was on tonight's official menu, along with some items that were exclusive to that menu. So for me, this was the Captain's Night menu. And if you've been watching, you know that's the night that typically means it's time for the Windjammer. So even with the special menu, the appetizers were the same ones that were on the main menu. So for me, I went with that French onion soup off of the extra menu again. And at lunch, I had an incredible pasta dish. It was a pasta ham bake that had tons of cheese on, and his French onion soup once again had tons of cheese. This ship certainly knows how to use cheese because every dish that has cheese in it just has tons of it. It's over the top cheese loaded, and it is always incredibly delicious. And once again, that was a great French onion soup. And I'm not sure what's special about this ship, but those chefs seem to get the cheese because I have not seen another ship use this much cheese on every dish that utilizes it. And it is a consistent thing. It was not a one-off thing or an error by someone. That French onion soup looked identical to that first night's. The cheese was just as thick and gooey on it. So that was my appetizer. For my entree, I then went with the vegetable casserole. Had this on some other ships. when it comes out, it looks a bit like an Indian dish. It's got that ball of couscous along with a bit of a vegetable mix and looks very well prepared to be presentable on the plate. And that dish, just as it was on the past sailings, was another very well prepared and delicious dish. If you don't think vegetarian dishes are that good or interesting, this is one of those exceptions, because while it is a vegetarian item on the menu, it certainly does not have the flavoring of a vegetarian dish. It has a ton of flavor to it, and it is a much better dish than it sounds by the name vegetable casserole. It has a lot more character to it than you would expect from that name. For dessert, we then had a special dessert that was presented in a very special way, with all the desserts coming out to the table at once, and a waiter behind every member of the table ready to present the dessert at the same moment. And tonight it was an almond Florentine basket, which was a very beautiful plate with some caramel drizzle on it, and an almond caramel shell. Looked almost like what you would find with a waffle shell, but it was made entirely out of almond and caramel, and contained within it was some ice cream, some strawberries, and a large chocolate leaf on it. So that was an incredibly delicious dish, and one that is not on the traditional Royal Caribbean menus. So who knows if this will make it to the menu at some point, if they use this to try things out, but it was certainly a much fancier looking dish than some of the other ones that we've seen, and it tasted delicious as well. So as I mentioned, this meal went until about 10:45, which meant I could not get to the first post-dinner item on the list, which was at 9:45, the Love and Marriage game show. That was in the Royal Theater. Did not get a chance to even catch a moment of that one, unfortunately, because of how long that dinner went. But as soon as that dinner ended, when we were leaving, I headed upstairs to Bolero's, and along the way caught that shot of the Majesty of the Seas and ran out on deck 6 to get a glimpse, see which Royal Caribbean ship it was, and confirm just who it was. And the reason I was headed to Bolero's was because 10 o'clock until 11:30, they had an extra long session of adult karaoke tonight. And tonight's edition was hosted by Andy, who we've seen many times, always adds extra character, extra humor, and fun to every event he's involved in. And even with karaoke, he did that. It was out of control, yet somehow completely controlled chaos. And when we walked in, you could already tell it was going to be a good session, because as we walked through the door, Andy was up there performing an Elton John song, so you knew it was going to be a good night the moment it started. That's something we've seen with the karaoke. It's typically more popular with the smaller ships. The Grandeur, now the Empress, and even on the Jewel, karaoke has more popularity than when you're on the Oasis class or the Quantum class. You really don't hear much, see much of it. It certainly doesn't get the crowds it does on these smaller ships. And a big part of it, while it does matter, the quality of the singing, the involvement of the guests, the crew that run it also play a big part in motivating people, making it enjoyable, getting people to want to watch it as well as participate in it. And on this sailing, whether it was Casey the other night or Andy tonight, they certainly do an incredible job of making karaoke a fun event for everybody to come out and watch and participate if they're interested. So that was 10 o'clock to 11:30. At 10:15 up on the pool deck, there was a Latin salsa dancing session, followed by 10:30 Latin Fiesta with Bob Alejo, which is the Latin band that is typically in Bolero's each night. They were up on the pool deck. I checked that out for a moment. Was thinking it might be a little more of a Latin style party, but for the most part there was a bartender out there selling some special drinks, and it was the band that is normally in Bolero's up on the pool deck performing. So it was pretty much the same setup and feel of what was in Bolero's, just up out under the stars tonight. And there was a fairly decent sized crowd, certainly larger than what would normally show up for a normal Bolero's night. And that was extra surprising because it was incredibly humid tonight. While it was beautiful all day, tonight that humidity really rolled in, and everything had a thick, humid, wet feel to it, and you could just feel that humidity after spending a couple minutes out there. But it certainly didn't stop many people from coming out and checking that event out. So that went until 12:30 tonight, and that was pretty much the last thing of the evening. So I walked around the ship even earlier tonight at like 10:45, 11 o'clock, 11:30. The ship's been empty. Walking through the casino, it was even empty. Waiting for that 7 o'clock show from 6 to 7 when we had that gap. Sitting in the Centrum, there was nobody around in the Centrum, the main heart of the ship. And that really goes to show you just how much space is on this ship, even with her small size. I have never felt crowded, never felt like it was too many people in a venue or I needed to get somewhere else to get away from someone. It's just been absolutely incredible how much space and room there is on such a small ship. And that is something that, even on those large ships, you always feel that little bit of crowdedness. You never get a feeling of just this much space on a ship, especially considering how small it was. That was certainly unexpected. As I mentioned, that really was the end of tonight, and that means the next thing on our list is an interview. So tonight, I've got a special interview, a person that really led the whole night, and that is Captain Shawn. Got to go up to that bridge, sit down with him, and learn what it's like to run the Empress of the Seas.
The master of the vessel, Captain Shawn, everyone. Welcome on board the Empress of the Seas.
So today I am joined by Captain Shawn up on the bridge of the Empress of the Seas. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for coming.
Can you give a little bit of background on yourself?
Well, my story is that when I was young, I always liked being out on the water. When I was a kid, we went on fishing trips. We went on all kinds of boating expeditions and that, and I absolutely loved it. It was fishing and ski boats, and then later on we went on some small yachts and things like that, and it was very enjoyable. It was always on the water. After high school, I got a job working for a ferry company in Vancouver, because I'm from Vancouver, Canada. Mm-hmm. And from there I got employment with the BC Ferry Corporation, and that was while I was going to university. I continued to work with them, and then I ended up working with them for 11 years. And while I was working there, I was a deckhand, and it was interesting work for a young man. I quite enjoyed being out on the water and sailing, and I became a quartermaster, and eventually I worked my way up doing some of my marine licensing and became a second officer on one of the ferries. I did that until about 1998 or so, and from there I decided it was time to get a little more serious with my marine career, and I went to sail with another cruise ship line, and I got some experience in the South Pacific, and that really opened my eyes to the opportunities of the cruise industry and how exciting it was to go to sea, actually. The ferries were very good to me, and going back and forth on ferries was great in the day, but once I went out to sea and got to see some of the world, it was there was no going back. So I did that, went back to school and continued with my marine licensing, because I wanted to work my way up to be captain one day. And it wasn't long after that that I actively sought employment with the Royal Caribbean, because it was the employer of choice, let's say, for a Canadian seafarer. And I was very fortunate to get an offer, and I came to work in 1999 for Royal Caribbean. Mm-hmm. And I've stayed with them ever since, so almost 19 years now with the company, and it's been a fabulous experience.
Yeah. So how did you progress through the ranks with Royal Caribbean?
Well, when I joined the company, I came as a second officer, and as a second officer you're one of the watchkeepers on the bridge, and you work together with the first officer, and it's a responsibility that you take on for the safe navigation of the ship on behalf of the captain. So I took that very seriously, and I spent a few contracts doing that position, and then they determined that I was eligible for promotion, which I was quite happy with, and they promoted me to first officer. So I spent a few years as first officer, gaining some more experience, and then I moved ships. The company is very good about giving you opportunity to move to different classes of ships on different itineraries in different parts of the world. So I did that. In my career, I've been on 10 different ships in the Royal Caribbean fleet. So I sailed as first officer for a few years, and it wasn't long after that, maybe 2-3 years, I became chief officer. So as chief officer, I was responsible for some of the maintenance and definitely the safety. The position was changed to chief officer safety, so then that was my primary responsibility. So not only was I part of the bridge team for the safe navigation, I was also responsible for drills for the crew to maintain the professional standard for the crew for all their emergency responses on board. And I did that for about 3-4 years, thereabouts, and that went very well. I very much enjoyed that. Again, I was on a couple of different ships and had many different opportunities, sailed with many different captains and staff captains, and got a lot of knowledge. And then after that, I became staff captain, and they moved me to the Majesty of the Seas as staff captain, and that was back in 2007 or 8 thereabouts, and I sailed there for a number of years. Very much enjoyed being staff captain on that vessel, and then I changed ships. I went to the Oasis of the Seas as staff captain, and I took the Oasis of the Seas out of the yard in Finland with the team. That was a huge experience for me. That was fabulous. And after a couple of years on Oasis as staff captain, I got the opportunity to be promoted to captain on Enchantment of the Seas. And I sailed there for 3 years out of Port Canaveral, doing 3 and 4 day cruises to the Bahamas. And that was a great experience as my first command. I had a very supportive team. It was good to finally make it and have a ship of my own. And then from there, I went to the Adventure of the Seas. I spent a few years as captain on the Adventure of the Seas, and that was sailing Caribbean, New England, all the way up to Quebec City, a variety of itineraries. It was very nice. And then from there, I've very recently come here to the Empress of the Seas.
So you were involved in the takeout of the Oasis Seas. Back then, that was the biggest event in the entire industry. What was that experience like?
That was an incredible experience. They were building a ship that was far bigger than anything that had ever been built before. And it's like anything, when you're building the prototype, you don't exactly know what it's supposed to look like when it's finished. There's a lot of design and drawing and planning, but when you're putting the physical together, there was not a lot of unknown, but it was very well thought out ship. But seeing it for the first time was quite the incredible experience. So I was in Finland. It was being constructed in Turku, and it was cold. But I was there as part of the delivery team, and we sailed the ship out and brought it to Fort Lauderdale. And I tell you, it was one of the proudest moments of my career to sail that ship into Fort Lauderdale. It was a beautiful sunny day, and the attention that ship brought was absolutely incredible. There was people from all over the world that wanted to see this ship. So when we came in and brought that ship in, it was a huge experience. It's one of my proudest moments with Royal Caribbean to be part of that delivery team. And I worked with some fantastic people, and everyone worked very hard to bring that ship to life. And I think it definitely delivered on all the promises that it made, and clearly as time has gone on, the ship is now 10 years old. It's provided a huge number of vacation experiences for guests, and obviously it's been a huge success because they've built several more in that class, and we're still proud to say that it's one of the world's largest cruise ships.
Yeah. So the Empress of the Seas you're on now is one of the smaller ships in the fleet. How does she compare to the other ships you've been on, such as Adventure and Oasis?
Well, Adventure and Oasis, those are obviously larger ships, much larger. Adventure of the Seas, which at one point was the world's largest cruise ship when it came out for a short period of time, is now considered a medium-size vessel. Now, to come back to the Empress is the smallest ship in the Royal Caribbean fleet now. If you go back to when it was delivered to Royal Caribbean in 1990, it was a huge ship. This was considered the ship of the future. This was the first ship that was designed as a cruise ship. A lot of ships prior to this one being delivered were ferries that were modified, ro-ro vessels. The cruise industry was still, let's say, in its infancy. It was still being developed. They were still trying to decide how it should all work. So it's interesting to basically look at this ship as a time capsule. This is how cruising was in 1990. So there's a few things that you'll find on this ship that are different from the newer ships. Cabin sizes are maybe a little bit different. Lounge sizes are a little bit different. They've made some changes as time goes on. It's the same way anything in the automotive industry has evolved. You have some older technology on this ship, but that said, even though it's an older ship, I have to give the company a lot of credit for making effort and putting time and money into keeping the ship at a new standard, with upgrades, with dry docks, with revitalizations. To even though the hardware may be older, they really do a great job and put a lot of money into keeping the ship at a Royal Caribbean standard. So I have to give them a lot of credit for that.
Yep. So the ship's size is one factor in the maneuverability of it. The other is her propulsion system. She does not have azipods, but how is maneuverability when working with this ship?
Well, maneuverability is very much based on the design of the ship. It's not necessarily the size of the ship. If you have a ship that's well designed and a ship that has sufficient power, you can do a lot with it. The ships that we build now have Azipod Propulsion, and Azipod Propulsion is a fabulous, absolutely fabulous tool that the company has given us. It's an expensive way of propelling a ship, but it allows for much more maneuverability in that you can vector the thrust of an Azipod to put the power on the ship to move it the way you want quite comfortably and in higher wind and environmental conditions. The Empress of the Seas is what we call a conventional ship, and most ships in the world are conventional ships. And when I say conventional, it's the way you think of a ship, with the engine in the middle and a long shaft going down through the hull and a propeller at the end and a rudder behind it. That's how everybody thinks of a boat or a ship. That's what we are. Azipod Propulsion is, of course, very, very different, where you have a pod at the back of the ship with an electric motor in it and the propeller on one end, and you can turn that 360 degrees. There's no shaft. It's electric. So it's a completely different way of maneuvering the ship. Conventional is fine for maneuvering. It just takes a little more understanding of how you're using your propellers, how you're using your rudders, and you have to work with the environmental conditions so that you can get the ship to the dock. People have been doing it for years and years and years. It's not a problem. They still build conventional ships. Some of the other cruise lines still build conventional ships. They're a less expensive ship to build. The conventional ships do have to contend with the weather conditions, because you don't have as much power as you do on an Azipod ship. This is where, when I was on the Adventure of the Seas, you had a lot of power to be able to move the ship to the dock. It was very comfortable to have that power. And after discussing with some of my colleagues in other cruise lines, they're very jealous that Royal Caribbean builds their ships with a lot of power. There's something to be said for that. So I'm very proud to work for a company that takes that into consideration with their construction, that they build the ships with enough power to get them to the dock, to be able to deal with weather conditions. It's a great thing. It is.
As the ships change sizes, the bridge changes sizes slightly as well. How does your team change, though?
Well, even though the bridge changes size with the ship, the let's call it the safe manning. That's the terminology we use for the complement of officers that we have on the bridge. That doesn't change so much. It has changed on the Oasis class ships because of not just the watchkeeping aspect, the navigation at sea. There's also the safety aspect, because the bridge team, the safety team, is not just responsible for quote-unquote driving the ship. We're also responsible for maintaining all of the life-saving appliances on board. So as the ships continue to grow, there's more lifeboats, there's more life rafts, there's more life jackets, there's more things that need to be checked and monitored and maintained. So that requires a few more people to assist with that. But the basic manning that we have on the vessel is, we have of course the captain. My second in command, or the XO, is the staff captain, and then we have a chief officer safety, and then from him we go down to the watchkeepers. So we have 3 first officers and we have 2 second officers. We also have on some ships cadets who assist on the bridge, and they're learning. They're part of a cadet program that we have with Royal Caribbean to develop new talent to come up and fill the second officer role, and perhaps they'll move up to captain one day. We have to continually be developing our talent. Also on the bridge team we have lookouts and quartermasters that come up to assist us on the bridge, because we need another pair of eyes at times, especially when we're coming in and out of the ports of call. So there's your basic requirement for maintaining the safe navigation. And the first officers rotate through 24 hours, so they stand watches, so they're on the bridge for 4 hours, and then they have 8 hours off, and in their 8 hours off they have to either get rest or perform some other safety duties. So it's very, very busy. On the larger ships, they add in another second officer and another first officer to assist with not only the watchkeeping on the bridge, but also the greater number of safety duties on board. So even though the ships have become considerably larger, the actual safe manning on the bridge has only increased incrementally. Now that said, our ship here, the Empress, we have 680 crew members. If you go on the new ships, Oasis, Harmony, you're up to 2,300 crew members, which is more than we have in guests and crew on board this ship altogether. So it's quite a considerable difference when it comes to the number of people on board.
Yeah. So the Empress of the Seas was my first Royal Caribbean ship back in 2002. I understand it was also yours. How did the Empress of the Seas go into your career?
Well, as I mentioned, I was working on ferries, and I was trying to get employed with the Royal Caribbean, and one day I got a phone call, and the opportunity was to come and join a ship, and it was fairly short notice, but you have to take the opportunities when they come. So I said, yes, absolutely, I'll make it happen. And I flew to San Juan, Puerto Rico, and I went up the gangway and I joined Empress of the Seas as my first ship, and that was quite the experience. So I sailed as a second officer here for 3 or 4 contracts, I believe, and then I hadn't been on Empress until 4 weeks ago, when I came back as captain on the Empress of the Seas. So I've, as some people say, I've come full circle now in 20 years. I've made it all the way back around, and some things have changed, and some things are still the same.
So the Empress of the Seas set sail back in 1990. She's coming up on her 30th birthday. What goes into ensuring she stays in the top condition?
Well, the company is very good about making sure that all of the ships follow all of the regulatory requirements. And when I say regulatory requirements, we have a classification society, DNVGL, which is monitoring and ensuring that we're maintaining everything from a safety standard, from a hull standard, to what it needs to be. And ultimately, this comes back to the safety of the vessel. We want to make sure that we have another pair of eyes looking at things that need to be maintained. And you can imagine, as any ship, any car, any house, anything gets older, there's a certain amount of maintenance that's required. So we have to conduct that maintenance. So it's ongoing, behind the scenes. Even when the guests are enjoying their vacation and sitting on the pool deck, there's somebody somewhere repairing something. So the company takes the ships, and as per the schedule, we'll do dry docks to take the ship out of the water, inspect the hull, do whatever work is required as far as inspection, repair, maintenance. It's like changing the oil on your car. If you don't change the oil on your car's not going to last very long. So you have to do the work. So this is what we do. We take the ship out of service, and we do all the necessary mechanical works that need to be done. We do any of the other works that we can't do in service because we don't want to interrupt the guest experience. And a lot of times the company will determine that they want to upgrade some of the venues on board the vessel in keeping with the brand standards and the brand requirements. So they'll come on board and spend, in some cases, quite a considerable amount of money to keep the ship at an acceptable standard for the guests that sail with us. So they'll spend millions on pool decks, on coatings, on carpets, on redoing staterooms, and they've definitely done that on the Empress. They've spent a lot of money to maintain the Royal Caribbean standard, and I'm very thankful that they're willing to spend the money to do that.
So we've had a lot of storms lately, and that has always been a problem for the cruise industry, to deal with these storms that disrupt itineraries. But in recent years, Royal Caribbean has gotten much better at not just getting guests to a safe area, but ensuring they still have an enjoyable vacation with new ports of calls, different itineraries. When those storms pop up and you get that notice that you're going to be diverted to a different itinerary, how do you go around preparing and getting set for that?
Well, I think what happens is that it's not that we were poorly prepared in the past. It's just the evolution of technology. We have much better advanced notice these days because of the technology with the Doppler radars, with the satellite imagery. If you go back in time 20 years ago, we were wearing pagers. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have the technology. So you are limited by your technology. My daughters are in their 20s, and they can't find their way through traffic without looking at the map on their cell phone. I had to use the paper map that was in the glove box of the car. So it's the evolution of technology, I think, that has given us more information, and we're able to make better decisions based on the information. And I think that's what's really benefiting the cruise industry as a whole, because we can take that information and we can see it far enough in advance that we can make good decisions as far as redirecting ships or changing itinerary. And based on modeling that the computers are able to do now, we can see what the predicted paths are of many of these storms, whereas in the past things were a little foggy. We could see a few days out, but we couldn't see 7 days out. So I think that has greatly benefited us. As far as the decision process for itinerary changes, we definitely have a great support team in Miami, and the support team is made up of a number of people from both marine and hotel operations, as well as we're supported by James Van Fleet, which is our corporate meteorologist. So he's very focused on the weather, and not just when there's storms. Every day we get updates, and he's watching. He's watching our backs. It's not that we're not watching, because part of our business as seafarers is to watch the weather. We are always watching the weather. But it's nice to have somebody supporting us from Miami who's watching the weather on a larger scale. When it comes time to changing the itinerary, let's say we see a storm developing in the Atlantic and it's making its way across and into the Caribbean, it will potentially affect itineraries on a number of different ships. So we have to look at options that are available. Of course, the number one priority is the safety of our guests, the safety of our crew, the safety of the environment, because sometimes if you get yourself into difficult conditions, there's environmental risk. We don't want to take that. And of course, the safety of the vessel itself. So its safety is the number one concern. I'm sure you've heard that from many captains, but it's the truth. So we tend to look at the conditions, and people come on cruises to have a nice vacation. They don't come on cruises to battle the storm. Most people would rather be at an alternate location in sunny weather than go to the port of call that was on the original itinerary and have poor weather. So we look at that, and for safety reasons, we look at the options that are available to us. Of course, we get support from Miami on making these decisions, and everything's well thought out and agreed to prior to decisions being made. We have to look fairly far in advance, because cruise ships aren't like they're not like airplanes. We're not flying at 500 miles per hour. We can't divert and be away from the storm as quickly as they can. We're doing 22 knots, which is 25 miles per hour. So 25 miles per hour, you have to make some early decisions on where you're going to go. That said, I think we do a very good job at looking at alternate itineraries and looking at what our options are. Recently, when there's been some storms and ships were sailing on eastern itineraries down towards San Juan and such, the company was able to secure some berths on a western itinerary, and ships instead went down to Mexico. And although our guests didn't necessarily go to San Juan, Puerto Rico, they were able to go to Cozumel and enjoy their vacation in a sunny spot there. And the majority of our guests are thankful for that, and it's always nice when they come up and they say, "Thank you for keeping us safe." Well, that's the job that we have. That's the responsibility we're entrusted with. So it's nice to be able to deliver on that. So that's how we make the decisions, and that's how we operate the ships.
So you're back on the Empress of the Seas. What's next for you, though?
What's next for me? Well, that's yet to be determined. For now, I've just joined the Empress again, so I'm looking forward to working with the team. Although it's a small ship, I think it's one of the friendliest ships I've sailed on. We have a loyalty program called the Crown and Anchor Society, and there's several million members of that, and quite a number of them cruise on the Empress because they like the small ships. So it's nice to be able to have that family feel, that small ship experience. And anyone who's looking for the small ship experience, they're welcome to come here and sail with us, because I think we do a very good job delivering that. And the guests have been very complimentary about the way we handle ourselves on the Empress. So it's a nice ship to be on. As far as the future goes, we're building new ships. We're building more Oasis class ships. We're doing other itineraries. We'll see what the corporate office in Miami has in mind. I would like in the future to experience possibly one of the new ships that are going to be powered by liquid natural gas. The LNG ships, which are going to be what's called our Icon class, are going to be coming out in the next few years. And that's something that interests me, and perhaps I'll get an opportunity to go and sail one of those ships. But whatever the company has in mind, I think all the ships in the Royal Caribbean Fleet have their charms. So I've been very fortunate to work for this company, and wherever they decide to send me, I'll happily go there and have a new experience. So who knows? We'll see.
All right. Thank you for your time.
It was a pleasure.
So as always, I have to thank Captain Shawn for taking time out of his busy day today on this beautiful sea day to talk about the Empress of the Seas and how he sailed on her once and how he got a start here and came back to her after all these years. So going along with that, we of course had the captain's welcome reception this evening right back here in the Centrum. So tonight for our venue tour, we're going to take a look at the Empress of the Seas Centrum. The heart of a ship is its centrum. Unlike most ships though, the Empress of the Seas centrum is located with the forward elevator spanning from deck 5 through 10. The forward location gives it direct access to the Royal Theater rather than the dining room as most ships do, with the main level accessed on deck 5 and the balcony on deck 6. Deck 5 is also home to the guest services desk on the starboard side and shore excursions desk on the port side. Between the two, guests have direct access to the schooner bar. The center of the centrum is an elevated platform that acts as a stage for the nightly games, as well as events like the captain's reception. The forward side of the centrum features a pair of glass elevators, while the aft side connects the platform to deck 6 with a staircase. On deck 6, in addition to the theater, guests can access the promenade deck, as well as all the ship's shops. Decks 7 through 9 feature full-height glass windows with various features such as the library and internet access, while deck 10 is the entrance to the pool deck and windjammer. In recent years, Royal Caribbean has worked to add Centrum Wow to its older ships. This brings elements of the Royal Promenade's energy to the classic Centrum design. When Empress rejoined the fleet, she gained the same enhancements with a full color lighting system to allow for a changing ambience depending on the need, and some added energy when wanted. So that is a venue that seems to go unnoticed on this ship. With the Grandeur, there was a ton of attention given to the fact that she had a Centrum, that it was revitalized, you had all that fancy lighting. On here, we've got a Centrum, but it's not mentioned much. You know, you've got those events each evening that take place in the Centrum, but for the most part, it's kind of taken for granted that it's here and it helps us get around the ship. It really is a big part of the heart of the Empress of the Seas, but unlike many other ships, it goes far more unnoticed than it really should for how much people actually utilize and cross through it during a day. So tonight we are on our first sea day of the voyage, and tomorrow will be the second port of call. We will be spending the day in Costa Maya, Mexico. Getting there bright and early. We have an 8 a.m. arrival. So be sure to come back tomorrow to check out everything about Costa Maya. That is a port of call just like Falmouth, Jamaica, that is a little more custom built for the cruise industry rather than just a standard city. And that means that we'll have some special coverage of that port to go over all the details of it, and probably even an entire cruise port video to go along with this stop. So be sure to come back tomorrow to check out all those details. As always, I'm Picone. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for the links.